Reading from the Gospel of John, the 2nd chapter, beginning with verse 1, from the Revised Standard Version. On the third day, there was a marriage at Cana in Galilee. The mother of Jesus was there. Jesus was also invited to the marriage with his disciples. When the wine gave out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "O woman, what have you to do with me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Now 6 stone jars were standing there for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to them, "Fill the jars with water." They filled them up to the brim. He said to them, "Now draw some out, take it to the steward of the feast." So they took it. When the steward of the feast tasted the water now become wine, he did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. The servant of the feast called the bridegroom and said to him, "Every man serves the good wine first, and when men have drunk freely, then the poor wine. But you have kept the good wine until now." This, the first of his signs, Jesus did at Cana in Galilee, and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Our passage today begins with "on the third day." At least that's the way it does in the Revised Standard and the New Revised Standard. But it's interesting that in some of the other translations, like the Living Bible, it begins 2 days later. Today's English version, 2 days later. And Phillips Modern English, 2 days later, there was a wedding in Cana. Interesting that some would say 2 and some would say 3. In the Greek, it is actually 3, so I'm not sure why the other translations decided to change it. But it begins with "on the third day." And if you look back in John, the first day, John the Baptizer's testimony and John's revealing of who Jesus is to his own disciples, Andrew told his brother Simon, and they both followed Jesus. The second day, Jesus' journey to Galilee, where Philip from Bethsaida chose to follow Jesus and persuaded Nathanael to meet Jesus, and he also followed him. So the first day was the revelation of John to his own disciples. The second day was the revelation by the disciples to new potential followers along the way. And here on the third day, while still in Galilee, they go to Cana and attend a wedding with Jesus' mother. Some scholars think that the mention of the third day is a reference to Jesus' resurrection. Maybe, just maybe, this is just the third day of John's story of Jesus. Joseph is not mentioned here. Most speculate that he has died by this time. That would explain why Jesus waited until he was about 30 to begin his public ministry. As the eldest son, it was his responsibility to take care of the family until his brothers and sisters were old enough to begin sharing that responsibility. Jesus' mother, whose name we are never told by John, appears only twice in John's Gospel. She appears here at the wedding of Cana, and in chapter 19, where she stands by the cross and is entrusted by her son to the guardianship of the beloved disciple. These 2 cameo appearances connect Jesus' first sign and his last breath. It is obvious that Jesus' mother plays some important role in the wedding reception. She feels some responsibility for preventing a disaster. She tells Jesus there is no more wine, and his response seems inappropriate to us. If I had addressed my mother as woman, I would have ended up in deep trouble. And Jesus simply responds, what, that, to me, to you. There is no verb in the Greek, but we seem to think that we have to add the verb is and a question mark at the end of it for it to make sense. So what is that to you or to me, the way we interpret that? But she just simply turns to the servants and tells them, do whatever he says you to do. She has the authority to direct the servants. So obviously she has some role in the wedding. Of course, it's far from clear what my hour has not yet come means. For references to the hour, it's very important to John. There's a lot of them. In chapter 4, Jesus says to her, woman, believe me, the hour is coming when you will worship the Father, neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem, but the hour is coming and is now here, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for the Father seeks such as these to worship him. Chapter 5, very truly I tell you, the hour is coming and is now here, when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear will live. Do not be astonished at this, for the hour is coming when all who are in their graves will hear his voice and will come out. Chapter 7, then they tried to arrest him, but no one laid hands on him because his hour had not yet come. Chapter 8, he spoke these words while he was teaching in the treasury of the temple, and no one arrested him because his hour had not yet come. Chapter 12, Jesus answered them, the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. And then a couple of verses later, now my soul is troubled, and what should I say? Father, save me from this hour. No, it is for this reason that I have come to this hour. Chapter 13, now before the festival of the Passover, Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart this world and to go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. Chapter 16, indeed, an hour is coming when those who kill you will think that by doing so they are offering worship to God. But I have said these things to you so that when their hour comes, you may remember that I told you about them. Chapter 17, after Jesus had spoken these words, he looked up to heaven and said, Father, the hour has come. Glorify your Son, so that the Son may glorify you, since you have given him authority over all people, to give eternal life to all whom you have given him. From these references, we can see that the hour is a significant concept in the Gospel of John. It's not necessarily a specific time, like on what your watch would tell or a calendar, but it is the fulfillment of the right time. Together they give a picture of the right time for Jesus to be revealed, to suffer, and die, and to be glorified. Now, while Jesus did not believe that his hour had come, his mother had no problem pushing him out of the nest and into his public ministry. Jesus instructs the servants to fill the water jars to the brim. 6 stone water jars were there for the purification of the Jews, each measuring 2 or 3 measures, 20 or 30 gallons. The stone water jars were not like the pitchers that we would use to pour water. They were huge containers that the water was taken out of for 2 purposes. One, to wash the dusty feet of the wedding guests. These, their sandals were simply leather tied to the bottom of their feet with a leather strap. Guests would arrive with either dusty feet or muddy feet, and hospitality required that all wedding guests, in fact, all guests to any house, should receive foot washing upon arrival. But the other use of the big pots was the purification rituals before each course of the meal. Not only did each guest have to have their hands thoroughly washed as they began eating, this hand-washing ritual had to take place before each course of the meal. And how that was done is your fingers were facing upwards, kind of like you were fixing to do surgery. Water was poured over them. Your fist would be in the palm of each hand to kind of symbolize that you had cleaned that part of their hand. You turn your fingers over so that your fingers face down. Water was poured over the hands again. And at that point, you were ceremoniously purified and able to take the next course of food. Now, this process of refilling those huge stone jars had to be strenuous, depending on where the nearest water source was. And Jesus says to them, "Draw out, carry to the head of the table," for which they did. Now, the next sentence is one of the most interesting sentences in the story. In the Greek, it reads like this: "Then, when the head of the table tasted the water that had become wine, and is not having known from where, but the servers who had drawn the water, having known, the head of the table addresses the bridegroom." If you were writing an English paper and had different tenses within one sentence, you would probably get a really bad grade on that. In this Greek sentence, there's present, aorist, the perfect, the pluperfect tenses, and they're all just kind of jumbled up there. But it does make sense. But it's a very odd way of putting everything. It's interesting to me that the sign itself, the water turning into wine, is referred to only in passing. You know, I love the meme where it's a picture of a grocery store, and it's where the wine is kept on the shelves, and above the wine, the sign reads "water," and somebody wrote on it, "Jesus has been here." So it's always kind of funny to me that that meme. So, but John doesn't dwell on the changing of the water and the wine. He's kind of mentioned in passing, and he doesn't dwell on it because I think the significance is that not the miracle itself, but the fact that the miracle is not the point. It's the significance that is the point. The details of when the water transformed from water into entirely something different is left up to the reader's imagination. So that it happened, yes, or how it happened, that's not that important. But what it means, yes, that's absolutely important. The head steward is amazed at the quality of the new wine. And at this point, only the servants and the disciples know that Jesus had performed this sign. We're not even told that Mary knew exactly what Jesus did. It sounds like she turned it over to him and just went on her way celebrating with the rest of the party. So at this point, only Jesus and his disciples and the servants know what has happened. Now, these servants had to be incredibly strong for them to keep filling those stone jars with water over and over. And the folks who would be for us today, the folks who would be standing on the edge of any wedding reception, waiting to serve, waiting to clear off the tables, waiting to carry individually sliced pieces of cake to the tables of the guest. Now, it was the servants who saw this wondrous miracle of abundance play out right before their eyes. It was the servants who saw it all. Those who would most likely never actually even get a sip of the 180 gallons of fine wine that's now being stored in those stone jars. Indeed, they were those who go mostly unseen, unnoticed by the rest of us. 6 stone jars, each with 20 to 30 gallon capacity, filled with water on his command, and the next thing you know, it's the finest wine you can taste. How did Jesus do it? Well, C.S. Lewis reflects in his book, God in the Dock, D-O-C-K. God creates the vine and teaches it to draw up water by the roots, and with the aid of the sun to turn the water into juice, which will ferment and take on certain qualities. Thus every year, from Noah's time till ours, God turns water into wine. That's certainly an interesting way of thinking about that concept. There are 7 signs in the Gospel of John. There are miracles or public actions that reveal the identity of Jesus to both the Jewish and the Gentile world. The first one, of course, this was the first one, the changing of the water into wine. Cleansing of the temple is called an act. The 2 healings, the Galilean official's son and the man by the pool, feeding of the 5,000, the walking on the sea, the healing of a blind man, the raising of Lazarus from the dead. Alice McKenzie says that each of the signs reveals something about the human condition, ourselves in particular. She says they invite us to take on the role of the people Jesus encounters in each one of these cases. Many scholars believe this is why, in so many cases, these people remain unnamed. The man by the pool, the boy at the feeding of the 5,000, the Galilean official and his son, the blind man. These people all presumably had names, but we will never know what they were. We are to fill in the blank with our own names. It may be, that John leaves them unnamed to make it easier for us listeners to step into that space and to stand with them in the experience of the scene. In the miracle at the wedding of Cana, human resources have come to an end. There is no more wine left. In other miracles in John, where humans have come up to an end of their medical skills or supply of food or supply of courage, Jesus steps in and heals and feeds and comforts amid the storm. Here he supplies what is needed for the feast to continue, the gift of wine. So the miracle, or the sign, as John puts it, is not so much the actual turning of the water into wine, although that in itself would be enormously important. John doesn't call it a miracle or even dwell on it. It is actually mentioned after the fact. But the more I read the story, the more I'm convinced that it's a wonderful miracle. It points to a miraculous life, not just that of Jesus, but you and me too. Do you live a life of miracles? My guess is that you would say no to that question. Life is pretty grim and gray and hopelessly devoid of miracles. But let me give you a tip. Fast forward your life. Close your eyes and imagine that you're the passenger in your son or daughter's car and you have one of those life flashing before your eyes moments. What do you see? In the speeded up movie of my life, I see many miracles that God has brought about. In fact, I'm amazed that I've missed so many of them in the ordinary day-to-day existence when life is slowed down to normal speed. How did I not see them? Miracles of love taking place around me, extreme acts of generosity, gracious forgiveness, kindness, care, and compassion. How have I missed all those miracles that have transformed my life so much? Perhaps because we can't see the wood for the trees or the water for the wine. But seeing the miracle is only half the story. Jesus lived a life with an awareness of the goodness and the generosity of God. This different vision is countercultural, and it is based on the radical generous, abundant love of God and God's desire for abundant life for everyone. It's the vision of John telling that story about the good wine at the wedding in Cana. It's a vision that starts with a recognition of need, of emptiness. It was Jesus' awareness of God's abundance that allowed him to pose an alternative to the status quo of his day. It was Jesus' aware of God's abundance that allowed him to say that everybody, really everybody, is welcome at the banquet table. It was that Jesus' awareness of God's abundance that set him apart as a wisdom teacher, offering the Beatitudes as a new way of living. It was Jesus' awareness of God's abundance that allowed him to say that the meek are blessed, along with the poor and those who are in mourning. Jesus did this first of his signs in Cana of Galilee and revealed his glory, and the disciples believed in him.